Hello, and thank you for joining us for this episode of the Spectrum Report. My name is Gabriel Williams, and I am the CEO of Spectrum Research Group. We are the makers of Neural Balance with Anandinol, and if you'd like to learn more about that, how it works, the folks who put it together, you can check our website out and just click on the How It Works tab. We'll have links in the description of the video. You can also check out our Facebook page. And something that we'll be talking a little bit about today is the importance of support base, whether it's family, friends, or other people that can just relate to your struggles. It is good to have a support group of people who are familiar with what you're going through. So we created a Facebook group years ago called the Neural Balance Support, and you can just search Neural Balance Support on Facebook and find us that way. And whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube today, we also are available on YouTube. Just search the Spectrum Report TV on YouTube and check us out there. And we already have some people showing up for the show, so I just want to remind you that Eustacia will be answering questions towards the end. As we start to unpack some of these subjects. So if you have a question that you would like to ask, just shoot us a question, leave it as a comment, and we'll jump out right then and answer that question for you. So don't be shy. If something that we say or do raises a question, feel free to answer. So as I mentioned, today's guest is Eustacia Cutler, and she is the mother of Temple Grandin, and I'm sure you're aware that's why you're here. She is an autism authority and a graduate of Harvard University. She has authored 2 books, and she brings to her blogs and talks a lifetime of research and insight into the social confusions of autism. And she has a great website that she put together. I'm going to show that here briefly, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth later. And she and her friend Chris Curry created a nonprofit called TGEC Autism Fund, and it's a top information source. There's a lot of great information there, and that stands for the Temple Grandin and Eustacia Cutler Autism Fund. And there's some great information there, blogs, things like that. We'll take a little bit of a closer look at that here in just a little bit, because I'm excited and I don't want to delay it any further. We'd like to bring Eustacia on the show. Good morning, Eustacia. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Well, so do I. It's great to be friends.
Yes, I've really enjoyed getting to know you and talking to you. Very interesting, your experiences, everything that you've gone through, and the things that you've learned along the way. And I'm just so impressed with your desire to create resources and the amount of time and energy that you've put in over the years, just helping other people, having personal conversations with people. One thing that I know is, a lot of times people go to these conferences and they see a speaker and the speaker's done and they disappear and they don't see them again, but you hang around, you take questions, you personally connect with people. And I think that's really important. So I really appreciate that. So one of the things that you and I talked about was the importance of early intervention, right?
Absolutely.
So over the years, how has, I know we're kind of limited in what we know based on your writing and Temple's writings and even the movie, which, how movies are. Sometimes they're very accurate and sometimes they have some funny things. So we always kind of wonder, what was it that caused you initially? Was it just Temple not developing speech yet that you were noticing things, or what were the things that brought it out for you in the first place that she needed more attention?
Other things. She was not connecting. And I think, I want so much, Gabe, to bring up what I feel is the most essential problem for those with autism. And it goes back a long way to the prehistory, when we long ago developed speech. It was an extraordinary leap from the animals. Animals know how to signal to each other, but they don't share thoughts. And we began to do that. And what people don't realize, and autistic, one of the big problems with autism is they don't understand that speech is symbolic. And we don't think of it that way. It comes so naturally, and most babies learn it very naturally. Temple didn't. There were a couple of things were happening in there. Uh, she she didn't speak, but she didn't look. As I don't know how your camera is focusing, but if I were looking at you, you and I exchange looks in our eyes. That doesn't happen with autism. And we don't realize that words are symbolic. They stand for, we turned our animal noises into little sounds that stand for an object, a creature, an action. It was an extraordinary feat. And right here, and we've learned it. Speech is learned. It's not automatic. We're not born with it. And I knew somehow Temple's problem rested right there. She wouldn't look, and she didn't want to be touched. And I took her to Children's Hospital, and where they studied her very carefully. She stayed there for 6 days or so. They did everything, tested her hearing, and they said, "No, she's autistic." But I loved the doctor, and he said, "All right, Dr. Carruthers," he was famous. He said, "I think she's going to learn to talk, but let's speed up the process." And he told me who to take Temple to teach her how to speak. And he gave me her phone number. Temple was with her from the age of 2 till she was nearly 5 when she finally learned. But she learned 2 vital things. Now, first of all, how to speak, but equally important, who she was in relation to the other children in the room. There were a group of them. None of them could speak, and they each had to wait their turn for Mrs. Reynolds to help them with their speech. Temple began to see herself in relation to other people. And what I had first seen with her was that she didn't connect. When the 2 children played in this sandbox together, the other child kept holding up her pail full of sand and showing us something, not yet talking, just kind of babbling, but connecting to us. Temple didn't connect. Her face was down, looking at the sand, and she kept running the sand through her fingers. She didn't connect with the other child. So what she learned was not just speech, but how to begin to connect with the other children in the room.
So it wasn't just her lack of speech that had you. There was a lot more to it. So, so you're kind of getting into my first question. Go ahead.
Just to finish what I was saying, it is autism isn't a disorder; it is a disconnection.
Okay, and we've talked about that too. The need to support that disconnection. Right, to make the connection. So if say somebody has a new diagnosis, their child, or they suspect, that's the big thing. What would a parent be looking for? Because I guess the average age of diagnosis is around 2 years, but a lot of the parents that I talk to say that they saw signs and had concerns well before then. So, and some even expressed that it was very difficult for them to get a diagnosis so they could start to get the support they needed and even know what direction in which to go. So for a person that is newly diagnosed or who may suspect that there's an
Fear.
issue, um, what should they be looking for? And then the second half of that is,
Yes.
where do they start try to find support once they?
Well, they go together. I think always of the work of Dr. Kathy Lord. She has a big office full of toys, and she sits down on the floor with the child, even if they're not speaking yet. And the two of them, and she'll begin to play with the blocks, and she'll pick up a block and she'll wave it through the air and say, "Zoom, I'm a plane." Now, most children play with blocks the same way. Another child will pick up a block and push it along the floor and say, "Brum, I'm a truck." They have both of them made the toy stand for the block, stand for an object, and made the sound that goes with it. That's symbolic thinking.
Mm,
If that thinking isn't there, and it does show up, I agree with you. The worry starts earlier than that, where you know something's not connected. But the definition of that, of the way children play with toys, as as Eric Erickson, who is a developmental psychologist, used to say, the way they play with toys indicates the way they will play with thoughts.
hmm.
They were both working on what's disconnected. And a lot of times autistic children will simply line up the box. They don't play the way the other children do. And children also draw symbolically, very, very young. They'll draw a square and they'll put a triangle on top of it and they'll say, "That's my house."
Yes, the house that every kid draws.
Yes. And they'll make little stick figures. "That's daddy."
Hmm.
And a little stick figure, "That's mommy."
Hmm.
And other children understand that. The problem for autism is they don't make that connection. And you find it at 2, you can start to help them to make the connection. As I said with Temple, the first time that she began to connect with others was when they had to wait their turn for help with speech.
Mm. You know, somebody has already asked a question that's along that line.
Oh,
Let me show that up. It's
what is
from
it?
Marla Moley, and like I hope I said that right,
Yeah.
Moley correctly. As a mom, what moment did you see Temple come into her own? So what was
Oh,
it that,
that's a really interesting question.
isn't it?
I I don't think there was an exact moment. It grew as we all grow, as we gain experience in life.
Mm,
And aspects, she began to be, what was good was she wanted to play with the other children in the neighborhood. Now she's getting a little older. And she said, the first realization was, I have to play the games the way the other children play them, or they won't let me play with them. It wasn't that they wouldn't let her, but this is the way we play capture the flag. This is the way we play hide and seek. If you don't follow the rules, you don't have to play with us. But the difference was she wanted to play with them. It took her time, but she began to learn, yes, I will accept the game the way you play it. And it wasn't easy. There were times when she just had meltdowns. But she came out of them, each time growing a little further, particularly when she found the other children didn't hold it against her. And what happens with tantrums is it's no fun to have them alone. The other children just shrugged their shoulders and walked away.
mm.
You have,
She's fortunate they had that attitude. It's nice of them that they were supportive of her in that
yeah,
way,
yes,
right?
they were. They were. They didn't blame her, anything. They just said, okay, don't play with us then. That we'll play our own game. But she wanted the game.
Right.
So after she got through her frustration and found that really nobody cared if she had a tantrum, she took the time to learn. And this is why I feel so strongly to start working young, before the autism is fully established.
Well, in one of your speeches, you talked about the importance of interacting with them very young, and even nurture and touch if possible, and how that that bonding with a parent helps them developmentally other ways as well. And then
Oh,
I know when you and I were speaking, you said Temple would have none of that from the
Gabriel,
get-go.
this is what people have asked me, mothers have asked me, what do you regret?
Mm,
One of the things I regret is just what you're talking about. Temple didn't want to be touched, and she didn't want to play games like peekaboo. So I felt, oh, I mustn't touch her then. And so
mm.
I didn't touch her. Big mistake.
Oh. You think it
And
would have desensitized her to it so she could benefit from
I
it?
don't know, but I always wish, when I look back, when people have said, what do you regret? That's
Mm,
one of the things. I didn't understand that children need that. And also, Temple, you see, was born in 1947. The war was just over. No babies were born during the war.
mm,
The men were all away. They were older children. So I had had no experience with a baby. I'd never even held a baby.
wow.
And that was true of all of mothers of my generation.
Oh, okay. So
We,
the importance of that FaceTime and even the skin on skin contact and all that,
yes,
nobody
yes,
even taught you that at the time.
nobody taught me that.
Mm.
And that's why I'm so glad you brought it up, because this is so important.
Well, and we also talked about a couple days ago, I think. We've been talking a lot lately, but a
Yes,
couple days ago,
I hope again.
yes, we talked about the importance of FaceTime with a baby, and how
Yes.
important, how they understand how a tone of your voice relates to your face, and whether that's happy or angry or annoyed or hungry, and that the importance of that interaction. We don't realize how instinctively our play with infants and babies is such a big part of their developmental process. So
I,
if a
I,
mother can't breastfeed, it's still important that she hold and nurture the baby while the baby's being fed, because that's part of that developmental bonding.
well, what this involves, Gabe, is imitation. For
Mm,
some reason, we are imitative creatures. It's an extraordinary gift. So if the mother plays a game and coos a certain way, the baby will imitate
hmm.
without even knowing why they're doing it or
Right.
what benefit is in it. We are imitating creatures.
So one of the key points that you would give is, even if your baby, young child, doesn't necessarily want that nurturing and that touch and that time, you should do
Do it,
everything you can to
do it.
desensitize them to it and do it anyway, right?
And
Um,
the chances are, because you see, they may imitate it. You don't. What you're looking for is how to catch them and bring
mm,
them to you.
right.
They chances are they can imitate. That may have
Okay.
been what Temple wanted with the other children. She wanted to join them. There was some instinct in her to imitate what they were doing.
And
It's how
she wanted that
she,
connection, even if
she
she didn't
wanted.
want the touch.
Yeah, she
Right.
she saw it as more fun.
Mm.
And this is
So,
what I think is very important for schools to understand, that these children, don't separate them. Give them a chance. to be with the other children and imitate them.
Right.
It will lead to a better connection.
Right. That makes sense. If you just put 5 people who have a developmental delay together and never around anyone else, then they're just going to reinforce.
What are you going to do? Yes.
Right.
They're
Right.
just
That
going
makes
to,
sense.
uh,
Now, some would say though, and this is something I've run into because I explained to you when I got into this, I didn't know much about autism. As I would have to admit, I was very limited. I saw the movie Rain Man and I thought I knew, and that was, that's one aspect of it, and that's it. So I didn't really understand, how to interact and what to think, and I think a lot of times people just out of they don't want to hurt someone, they don't want to offend someone, they just kind of avoid, and that I think is a big mistake too, because the parents and the family, they need that support from others and that acceptance and everything. Before we get too far away from that, we did get a good comment here, and I'm gonna answer this person's question with a question first, but we have a good comment here. And I would ask Joan DiCarlo, she asks, my grandson talks a lot. Most of it's not clear and not in full sentences, and it's affecting his self-esteem. How can we help him at home? I think it would be helpful to know how old he is.
I was just about to ask the same question.
Right. And then he's on the spectrum. She followed up and said he is on the spectrum. But Joan, if you could let us know how old, right? Let us know how old, and we can try to answer that a little bit better. He's 8. Okay, she said he's 8.
Yeah, that's more difficult because he's more used to being autistic. Yeah, I think we have to remember the reason for the word for autism. It comes from the Greek word autos, meaning self. And Eugene Buehler in 1905, autism is old, we've always had it, coined that word. He saw some of his patients. He was Swiss, working in, I've forgotten the organization, but they were working with these children and with adults. He saw autism as a self-ism. It's harder. The older they are, the more established the pattern of just believing within oneself gets established. And it makes them take up interest in things that they can do alone. And they become obsessive, a lot of children do, of one particular topic. And they'll become quite expert on it. They're good at systemizing. But it doesn't connect them to anybody.
So in this case, with the grandson, he talks a lot, but he's not clear. Would it?
Yeah, there it is.
One thing about you that I was impressed with, and I think was very beneficial to Temple, is that you pushed. I mean, pushing and stretching and feeling uncomfortable, that was all part of Temple's upbringing. And often we go in the other direction with our kids, and we want to protect them and coddle them and cushion them, and that does more harm than good.
You bring up the old, go on. I was just going to say the old rule is unconditional love does not mean unconditional acceptance.
Right. So in this case, continued speech therapy and support, but how would you push an 8-year-old grandson who has that speech problem? How would you push them to move outside of their comfort zone?
I would say it's the rule. There's no point explaining autism to them any more than explaining blindness to a blind person will give them sight. So if you establish rules. This is the rule. This is what we're going to do. They can accept rules because by 8 he's been in school of some sort. I don't know what his school condition is, but he knows schools are run by rules. The bell rings, the class is over. That's the rule. You stand up when you recite. It depends upon the school. That's the rule. They can see that. That makes sense in their way of thinking. And it's a good way to stretch them without breaking their rules.
Right.
Does
So
that make
this would
sense?
be it does. So speech therapy would definitely be in order, and I bet that's probably occurring, and support, positive reinforcement for the effort put forth, but also a clear expectation,
Yeah,
right?
you're expected to carry this out. Yes,
Right.
even at 2, Temple knew in the speech class that they had, each one of them had to wait their turn to talk to Mrs. Reynolds and have help. That was the rule.
Hmm. And rule now, there have been a couple things that you've said that have had me kind of reminded me of this young man that I've seen on social media. I think I learned about him on Instagram. Um, you mentioned how they might withdraw and become very focused on something,
Yeah,
and I now that you say it that way, I'm thinking of many people that I've learned of over the years. Since working in this realm, where they focus on something and they become very good at it, great
yeah,
artists. Even Temple herself, she focused on the welfare of animals, and
yeah,
because of that focus and that passion, she's done great things in that regard. And um and that it's also kind of a way to protect themselves, and find an interest that's kind of self-consuming. This one young man that I saw, but it was also the symbolic thinking, the lack of symbolic thinking,
yeah,
that made me wonder. Because of this young man, one of the things that he does, he takes small model cars, automobiles, trucks, that types of thing. He paints them and he puts them in a little setting, and he creates a whole little world around them. And then he takes photographs of them, and they look like real large,
uh,
and in
it
some
looked,
cases it'll look like it's in a junkyard and it's dilapidated, or
yeah,
it'll look brand new.
yeah.
And there's a symbolism there. There's some symbolic thinking, I think, there, right? So that lack of symbolic thinking
Well,
may be for
it's a,
most, but not all.
well, that's a good point you brought up because there's a confusion, is what it is. It's it doesn't. You can't count on it.
Hmm.
That would be the best way I could think to explain that confusion. It doesn't relate in a way that we're used to relating to each other. It's unreliable,
Hmm.
uh, and it's not unusual. And it's that kind of meticulous attention to one detail. Uh,
Well, it reminds me of we put out a blog post one time that really, we got a lot of heat from some people in the autistic community, and it was about, is a fixation healthy? When does a fixation become unhealthy? Was basically the idea behind it,
oh,
right? So,
that's a good question.
yeah, in this young man's fixation, it's artful. It's people like it, and because of his fixation on the old cars, turning small cars into old looking cars and all of that, he is now has an income that is good, because that'll help for his future, and people are appreciating his art. So it's forcing him to come out of his shell a little bit as he's going to art shows and appearances and all of these. So what he developed as a fixation that protected him and helped him to withdraw actually ultimately caused him to have to go outside that comfort zone and
Yes.
take part in the wider world.
Yes.
So that's a good, healthy fixation. That's something that we would want to support, but not all of them are so good.
No, they're not. And it is, it's imaginative. It also, it involves that. He can envision the car as a wreck. He can envision it in snow in the winter or in summer, uh, which is an artist's talent. How we all think visually. It's how we recognize each other in the street.
Right.
But we don't. Some people do this better. Artists do it better. As one, it was a movie producer who said, and I read it somewhere just recently, and he said, if you can't imagine the scene, you can't create it in the movies.
That makes sense.
It does. It did to me.
Yeah.
And that's what somehow you see this boy is, this is what you want to work with. You see, it's his joy. It will,
Right.
and it will lead him to what he has to join with other people. And they're happy to join with him because he's giving them something they want.
Right. And he's very talented. I follow him on Instagram. I think is Anthony Schmidt Photography, I think is what it's called. But it's if someone were to Google like autistic boy old car photographs, they would probably pop something as simple as that, because he's become very well known. But other fixations can be very unhealthy. So as parents, we have to decide what we support, what we allow, and what we dissuade them from as they're growing. Yes.
They're disconnected. His inner has a certain amount of connection to the way we see things.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not without. See, autism is on a scale, and I gather he's now not just a boy. He's grown up.
He's a teen. I'm not sure exactly. I'd say late teen.
Young adult.
Right.
Almost. Right. He's not in middle school.
Right. No. He's definitely in high school age.
He's in high school. And it's giving him pleasure, and it's connecting him.
Right.
And that has now begun to give him pleasure too.
I'd be interested to learn. Maybe I'll try to interview his mom. I'd be interested to learn how this has affected his life outside of his hobby, because it is stretching him. He is doing a lot of things he would never have done. I want to tell you before we move on, the question you just answered about the 8-year-old grandson from Joan DiCarlo. She said, so inside. It looks like I just froze up. She said, so insightful. He is in a special needs class, and he has a wonderful speech teacher. Thank you so much. So and then we have another question here, which I think would be helpful. And this is from Kathleen Seeley. As an autistic adult, I really struggle with situations where the rules are either flexible or where they frequently change. You're not alone there. I'm too. Are there any exercise? This is a good question for me too. Are there any exercises or suggestions that you have to improve my ability to handle such situations? That is a great question, and I love the self-awareness too.
That's a marvelous question, and it deserves thought. Somehow, this is a girl or a boy?
Kathleen Seeley.
Kathleen, it is a girl. She has to learn to read faces a bit. We say things that are sarcastic, and most of us know just by the look in the face what that means. We don't take it literally. We understand sarcasm. It is a social thing. She's got to read faces. And
that would,
and it isn't precise, and you don't know if somebody's trying to trick you on purpose, which
right.
people do.
Do you think that one of the reasons why she might be thrown off? So she said she struggles with situations where the rules are flexible or where they
Absolutely.
change.
Yeah.
So that it is it the I know for me, and I may not experience to the extent that she does, but for me, I just like to know what to expect and what's happening and what's expected of me. So if I see that the rules are different for different people, I don't like that. Or if I go into something expecting one thing and then something different happens, I'm it throws me off too. So I imagine being an autistic, that would create sensory issues and it would really throw things into overdrive. So how would she adapt if she is expecting maybe a rigid rule set and then she gets into it and finds that it's kind of wishy-washy? You never know what to expect. How do you adapt to that?
You have to learn how to read it. That's what insight is.
Mm,
And as you get older, you read it better. Uh, it's it's one of the there's not much to say for old age, but one of the benefits of it is insight, which grows. You get better at it as you get older. You understand it more. It's like rereading books that you read when you were young, and you reread it years later. The book speaks to you in a very different way.
mm, that's true. Your
And
experiences, your understanding change.
as your understanding changes, and just know that keep your eye open. That would be my advice to her. Just, and you don't have to respond. You're just going to watch. And pretty soon you'll read it a little better. There are no answers to a lot of these questions, particularly questions like that.
Well, I wonder if you're very something I was just thinking about, if she just loves the rules, which I do because it gives me that structure and that
It's easier.
understanding. It takes away the surprise. If she likes the rules, then maybe creating a rule for herself that applies to when I'm suddenly faced with an unexpected circumstance. The rule is I will not speak about it for a minute, take a few deep breaths, think about what's going on and why things might have changed. Like if she creates a little process for herself that she can kind of run through that process when things don't go as expected, then maybe that gives her an anchor, right? A process or a rule that she can follow that's consistent that will help her process the inconsistency that's beyond her control. Or would that just be coddling?
No, no, I think that's a good thought. And what occurs to me is, what my question and answer is, what makes friendship? Why, why the people? Why who are the people we care about? They don't give us a mixed response. We like them and they like us,
Right.
and we are able. Just what you and I are both doing right now, we're fumbling with some of these questions. We don't have the answer to them, but we have a sense of friendship between us.
Right. And we talked a lot about, and you have too, about the importance for having a support system and for having access to good
Yes,
materials and information, other people's
yes,
experience. So I want to take a minute and talk about this because you've done some great work. You've written books. You give speeches all the time. You do talks for professionals, for parents, for caregivers. You have a lot of material that's easily accessible. So I wanted to throw this up here.
oh,
You
thank
and your
you.
friend Chris, yes, have created this great website, and there's a lot of free resources on here. And the web address is tgecautismfund.org. But I'll make it easy for everybody and put a link in the description of the video so they can just click on it and go right to it. But I love this website. It's an updated from your prior website, and you have put a lot of work. You and Chris your team has put a lot of work into this, but this is years of your experience, your talks. There's videos on here, webinars, books, different resources, your YouTube channels there, your blog. So I just love the amount of effort and time that has been put into this to give this information away. I mean, if people are looking for support, where do I start? What do I do? This is a great resource. And I mentioned before, you're one of the few conference speakers that hang out and answer questions and get personal with people. And right here, you have how to get in touch with you. There's a phone number and an email where someone can reach out to you. You'll guide them to resources near them, but you'll also chat with them and help them and hear their questions and their personal story. And I think that that's very commendable.
Well, thank you. What you also bring to mind is money. I had the financial resources needed to help Temple. And one of the things I wanted to do with this website was it would be free. Because many times, and this applies to schools that are looking for information, and nobody has guided them. I think also of a school here in New York where I knew there was an autism class, and I called the principal, it was a high school, if I could attend the class. And she said, "Oh, yes, of course. The city gave us money, but nobody told us what to do with it."
Oh, gosh. If that's not a picture of government, I don't know.
Yeah, and so you have to understand what you need, and you have to have financial resources. Still, I can't answer all of that, but
well, and that was one of the things you mentioned to me, that you were very fortunate when that you were able to get
lay
Temple,
my hands on the money.
Right, the help that she needed because you had the resources. And that's where I think a lot of people they wanted immediately, like Easter seals, and there are places locally that can guide you to resources and things like that, and that stuff is important. So I've talked to parents who hesitated to have their kids tested because they were afraid of the stigma, right, that would come with it. But you're delaying that care, that the sooner it comes, the better. And that was something, that works on very many levels: developmentally, emotionally, spiritually, and nutrition, and all of that. The sooner the sooner you get started, the sooner you start supporting that person, the better they're going to be and the farther they're going to go. So that was something that Temple was very fortunate that you had the resources. But there's a lot to be said for gumption, right? And
it takes some of that too.
Right. So you had the gumption to not do what everybody else did with their kids in that day and age, right? There were other people that had the resources, but they didn't insist on the care. Right. So I commend you for that.
It's envisioning something. How do you have to, oh, that's such a good question. But you have to envision it. You have to understand what the problem is, get hold of it. And I was lucky. I was also guided by a series of women who had worked. There was no formal autism structure in those years, but there were women who had worked, and they all knew each other, and they passed me one to another. And that was a big help. But where you're touching on denial, and denial comes from fear.
Right.
And we all we all suffer from it until we realize it's going to take us nowhere.
Right. Well, there can be a stigma. I mean, there is a stigma
Well,
associated
there is a
with
stigma,
autism,
yes.
right? And I think there's always two very hardcore sides of almost every issue, and we talked about before. There are some who are very offended to think that we would need to support people with autism at all, but I always what I've seen is autism is a good and a bad. It's a double-edged sword. There
And
are people
abs-
who are so intelligent or creative or focused, and they're able to do wonderful things for the world and for others because of their autism. But at the same time, that person may have crippling anxiety, the inability to sleep, sensory processing disorder. And in order for them to make use of their gift, they also need the support to deal with the not so good parts of being autistic, and that's where I think it's important for caregivers and parents to look for that early intervention and show that support and find support from other people. And I really appreciate you letting us interview you today and putting together these resources. They're going to be very helpful to a lot of people. And I think if you have the energy, I'd like to interview you again, because I think there's some other things that we could even go
oh,
deeper.
I
Yeah.
yes, to be continued,
Yes, for
because you're
sure.
touching on what also happens at an older age. The bright autistic kids who can go to college but have got to have help in college. Temple had to have help. In the years when she went to college, you had to take SATs. She couldn't take them. And the headmaster of the school, which was a assisted living for teenagers with autism, and the local college, Franklin Pierce College, they were close friends. They sat down, bless their hearts, and said, no, Temple's going to get to college, and we're going to see that she does. And they arranged it between them, how to help her through those years. And one of our team, Sally Burton Hoyle, helps to young, I guess you'd call them young adults, depends upon, most of them are in their late teens,
Mm.
helping them through college and insisting that they follow the rules they must follow, which they feel, oh, well, I don't have to do that. She said, yes, you do. And so it's a balance between pushing them, you're going to have to do this, and supporting them.
You know what? I also want to mention, I was starting to wrap up a little bit. Things are winding down, and we've been almost
Yes,
49 minutes now. But I do want to mention you have a new book out, and I'd
yes.
like to mention that. Is that on the website? Do you
It
know?
should be. It's the social history of autism. Where
Okay.
where what if we this autism is old? I keep saying over and over. We just didn't have a name for it. So I went back. Basically, it covers mostly the last 200 years. But 200 years ago, they still believed that autistic children were changelings. Do you know what a changeling is?
No.
The fairies have taken your child and put one of theirs in its place. It will look like your child, but it won't speak and it will play tricks on you. So you must throw it on the fire and it will fly back to its fairy home. They did, they destroyed them.
That's horrible.
And that's one of the early stories in it is the pursuit of Victor the Wild Boar of Aveyron, where there were those who were after him to kill him as a changeling, and how he got saved by Dr. Itard, a young medical student who got him to Paris, to the great doctor there who released the insane from chains. And that's when the change began to happen. We didn't.
Mm.
So that's the kind of story I thought we need
This
to
is
look at
I
this.
found it. I pulled it up here.
Oh, good.
Let me share. I couldn't find it on your website. I found it on Amazon, but it
Ah,
just it was just trying to search while we were talking. But so this is and this is the correct one, right? Autism and Us, old as
that's right.
time.
Yeah, all this
Okay,
time.
so this is new. Oh yeah, I see. It just came out September 6th,
Yeah,
2022.
yeah.
Autism is old and unruly. It's been part of us since we first left handprints on cave walls 40,000 years ago. Autism and Us covers a long stretch view of its neurological history and how society has judged it. So this looks very, because again, I mentioned earlier, my limited exposure was the movie Rain Man. And I'm not trying to be funny or disrespectful or insensitive, but a lot of people, that's their view of autism. That's all they know, right? They call it a spectrum for a reason, though.
Yes.
And so something like this is great because, we also hear autism is new. It's only been around for the last 3 or 4 decades and
We've
this and
always
that.
had it.
Right. And I think, as I do give some credence to the fact that it seems that there is a higher rate of it, right? But
Well,
a
there
lot of folks attribute it to diagnosis ability that we didn't have before. But
I think there's a mix in there because a lot of, as you've probably run into, a lot of autistic people are very good with systems. And when I was in Silicon Valley, where they're all systemizers and they're all rich, they drove me around in Jaguars, and they all have autistic kids.
Well, there was a time where, and we talked about this too, there was a time where we would just describe some of those folks as quirky and really smart.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's about it. That's a good description.
And it's true to a certain extent, but with that comes sometimes with challenges they need understanding and support for.
And they systemize, but that doesn't mean they empathize. They're two different ways, two forces that work in us, and we need both. You and I talked about that at one point.
Yes,
when I told you Simon Baron Cohen's story, and you said, "Oh no, I would never walk by that child." Do you remember?
Yes. So sad.
Most of us have a balance between the two.
Right.
And at the moment, systemizing is the big activity, and more young people going to college are picking science for their major. They're not looking at English literature, which is really the history of our social feelings.
And it brings you out of that rigid system that science, right? And that's where the creativity and that all of that comes into play. So maybe one of the things that we could encourage for our autistic children who are entering college is to take some other classes that would give them a little bit more of that abstract thinking that might help them also in just the way they deal with the world. So
yes.
Well, Eustacia, it was such a pleasure having you today. I just love talking to you, and I think that we could probably go all day, but we're coming up on an hour, so we want to cut this one off, and then we'll schedule the next leg, and we'll get a little deeper, okay?
I'd love that. Thank you.
Sure. Is there anything that you want to talk about or promote, or that new work or anything?
I think you've covered them. But the best words that always come to my mind are the ones that I found when I've spoken in other countries. They all register to, is there are no answers. There are only choices, I've said. But choices can be changed. And you will change them, and you will be changed by them. But the more you know, the better choices you will make. And this will help your child. The more you will also have the courage to carry out your choices. And that is registered in every country.
Yes, yes. I like it. Thank you so much for being here. It's been a great interview. I love all the resources, and I just appreciate all of your body of work, the years that you've put into looking outward and seeing how you can help other families. It's been very valuable. We thank you for it.
Thank you. Well, I also appreciate your work
Oh, thank you, thank you. It's
very much.
rewarding. I think both just
Uh,
love to help people, right?
yes, yes. And we will put our heads together again.
Yes, we will. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
You have a good one.
Same to you.
All right. Thank you so much for watching today as we interviewed Eustacia Cutler, Temple Grandin's mother. She has done such a great amount of work. And as I mentioned, all of these, now this is her latest book, but also she has free resources available on her website. And looking at her website, there are webinars on there that you can access for free. There's a blog where she has written about her experiences, things that she's learned. There's information there about Temple, lots of really good stuff on the website, and that's for the Temple Grandin and Eustacia Cutler Autism Fund. And it is tgecautismfund.org. And as I mentioned, we'll have a link to that also in the description of the video. So you'll be able to access that with just a click. Without further ado, I'm going to let everybody go today. I just want to sign off. My name is Gabriel Williams. I'm the CEO of Spectrum Research Group. We are the makers of Neural Balance with Anandinol, and they are the sponsors of the Spectrum Report. You can check us out on our website. And if you want to see specifically the science behind the product, you can just click on the How It Works tab. Check us out on Facebook. And as we did talk today, there is an importance in finding a support system. And one of the ways that you can do that is by joining our Facebook group. It's full of parents and caregivers and of people on the autism spectrum and people with autism themselves. So you can join that group. It's free. And you can also check out our channel on YouTube. Has pretty much all the same videos and stuff as our Facebook page, but some people prefer that platform. So stick around for just a second for a short word from our sponsor. Thank you for watching the Spectrum Report.
I would say within the first 2 hours of her taking Neural Balance, she's usually more calmer. I would say that she's much more in a happier place, a calmer place, a more a soothing place for her.
Because of NeuroBalance, my daughter can sleep through the night consistently, which hasn't happened in years, and we are so thankful.